Well, good afternoon. This is going to be a little bit of a different take on navigation. It's going to be the people who navigated and into an area that's not that easy to navigate in at all. So we're going to look at a bunch of different examples of this, starting off with the Inuit people who've been in the Arctic areas in North America for 5,000 years, who developed various monoliths and stone structures to guide them in different areas. And upper left, you see these interesting maps that some of you may have seen carved out of wood, which show the relationships of land and fjords and mountains, especially collected from East Greenland. Really intriguing way to present maps in a three-dimensional context. These are done for explorers who needed to find out something from the native people, and they started representing their landscapes that way. The Vikings were the first to navigate into the into the North American Arctic areas. You see from this map here. We had a wonderful Viking exhibit here in the year 2000, and the map shows you this asymmetry that exists in the North Atlantic, with all the warm water heading south to northern Scandinavia and the cold water pumped out of the Arctic into East Greenland and down the Labrador coast. So that created some big challenges for the Viking navigators when they left what they thought were rather balmy conditions in Scandinavia, latitude sailing across to Greenland and North America, discovering a very, very different environment when they got there. And we have found a lot of Norse objects in the Inuit sites and Paleo-Eskimo sites in North America, in the Canadian Arctic. You see the map showing many of these finds as far south as the Maine penny. Anybody of you know about Maine? That upper right-hand coin is a 1065 to 1080 coin found in Brooklyn, Maine, in an Indian site, indicating the Norse were actually continuing to come to North America even 7-8 decades after the Norse voyages in 1000. And bits of iron and bronze pots, a very peculiar thing, a balance arm from a Norse trade balance. It came up from a site, carpenter's planes and all sorts of stuff that have been found in Inuit sites, scavenged probably from Norse wrecks that were attempting to navigate in the Arctic, looking for probably walrus tusks to trade to Europe. I participated in some of these discoveries here. This was one of my first excavations in Hudson Bay, and I found this little bronze pendant made out of European copper. So we know the Norse got all the way into the northern part of Hudson Bay and spread some of their materials through the native networks. And lower right is a Ramatured artifact from Labrador that found its way back to Greenland in a Viking grave, probably in the body of a Viking. Kind of an interesting way to make connections. Here we have two, there's always been a lot of discussion about how the Norse got around. These two things, the one on the lower right is a calcite crystal, and there's been some speculation that people could use a calcite crystal to hold it up even in a cloudy day and see the sun, to navigate by sun reckoning and so forth through the clouds. Totally bogus idea. It's never been mentioned in the Norse sagas, and only one crystal like this has ever been found, but in a Norse context, but never on a boat. The other is this little disc with notches, which some people have thought is a kind of a sundial that would give you bearing compass kind of readings, like a sundial might. But it's from an Inuit site in West Greenland, and it was probably, a child's buzzer, that just you whirl around like this and it would make a buzzing sound. So in reality, the way Vikings got around was mostly latitude sailing using the birds, and they could estimate at noon the height of the sun over the rail or the horizon, and they could tell if they're sailing east-west or if they're too far south or too far north, just as Doug has mentioned for the Pacific area. So that and just knowledge of the currents and the winds and birds would give them a lot of the directions they needed. So a very peculiar boat was found in the Canadian Arctic. This one on the left, it almost looks like it might be a dragon boat, a Viking boat, but the Vikings never had two masts, and this is probably a 16th century boat as described by the hat that the sailor is wearing. This is in a wonderful little exhibit. It's in the Mystic Seaport Museum. If any of you got a chance to go see it, it's there for another few weeks, I think. But this was just a chance find. And in the lower left, lower right, the San Juan, which is a Basque ship that was excavated from the bottom of Red Bay in Labrador by Robert Grenier in Parks Canada. The best representation of a 16th century vessel that's ever been found. So a lot of contact. And we're moving now to Martin Frobisher, 1576, seeking the, for the British, seeking the Northwest Passage to China. We did quite a lot of work on the Frobisher sites a number of years ago. You see John White's drawing of an encounter with the Inuit and the location of that site. It's a fantastic series of expeditions. At one point, 16 ships were sent from England. By that time, they were actually trying to mine gold that they thought they found, and we visited and excavated some of those sites, as you can see here. Charles Francis Hall, a newspaperman from Cincinnati, got involved. You see some of his finds from Baffin Island. And an iron bloom that came to the Smithsonian from Hall's work, which stimulated a lot of our work. Story too complicated to be told. Again, for the question session afterwards, okay? And then we have Parry and Ross, and this is leading up to the Franklin expeditions, which is next on our list here. And you see the routes into the Canadian Arctic with the Erebus and Terror. You see the, here we go for navigation. Here's some of the modern 19th century navigation tools, the sextant and taffrail and compasses and clocks and so forth. And of course, they had quite a lot of fancy activities on board those ships. They had wonderful china and so forth. They weren't expecting to come to the terrible end that they all eventually did. And we were then locating them in the recent years. I went backwards, I think. So we found a lot of information, and the Canadians have identified the location of those two ships based on mostly Inuit records. And here you see, here's the bell that was recovered from the one of the Franklin ships. So again, this is all talked about in the exhibit that the Canadians produced and now in the Mystic Seaport Museum. The Narwhal is got his own navigation mechanism. It's coming out of its forehead, and like most cetaceans, they're able to bounce signals off rocks, off ice, even off prey, and so come see our Narwhal exhibit if you haven't done that, and we're still trying to figure out what the tusk is all about. Thank you very much.